So this blow up things on my legs. I take those things off. Whenever I get ready to go back in, I just bring
About that.
Yeah. She has this,
Disregard for human life.
there's Chuck with white eyes.
Well, when I looked over at you, you looked at me kind of puzzled. I'm like, how do you know see my hand? And then, but I'm like, you can't see me that well. And then I'm thinking, he doesn't want to talk to me.
The glasses just dark enough, I caught your beard, and I thought, that's probably Chuck.
But then I said, maybe he's petrified. Maybe he's
The
let
speed.
maybe he's let her drive and he's scared to death. I don't know.
Could you come out today? I knew there was a reason. Because I'm gonna sneak up on Chuck and get him.
When I saw the car, I was like, I think that's Eric. I got alongside of
He has this habit, staying in the left lane all the time.
Yeah,
I don't do that.
But the thing is, I don't criticize anybody. I look at it, it's like, that's not what I do. And it's like that old, I'm not, I like doing cars. If it wasn't just for
Well, yeah.
most of it.
There was some good stuff.
It's some good stuff.
Some really funny ways of looking at it.
Yeah, stuff that's not profane. Everybody driving faster than you is a maniac. And I thought, that is, I said, that's absolutely true.
Yeah, that's nice.
If you're sitting there, everybody needs to be driving the exact same speed. And I need to be in front.
Yeah.
And then everybody behind me needs to drive the exact same speed. If you're
Fall in
passing me,
line.
you're a lunatic.
Yeah.
If you're in front of me, you're going slow, and I have to pass you.
Well, I just noticed in the last 5 years,
Man,
there's a lot of slow drivers.
oh yeah.
I mean, all of a sudden on the interstate, you'll slow down to 50. And I don't remember that 20 years ago.
See on surface streets is like that kind of thing. You know, years ago, you were left hand, the cars really drive to me. It's very okay, so it's Wednesday. And I was on I-20 and we're on I-20 everybody's getting
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we're sitting there, and everybody's in the lane. Either the last minute they didn't realize which I did, they're just trying to drive as fast as possible. Then they get over it.
Yeah.
But then they, everybody, the line is packed, so they can't get over it. So now they've got their plate
Oh, yeah.
in the middle of 20
Yeah.
with cars moving at 65. They're just waiting.
Sitting there, yeah.
It's like waiting to be let in.
Yeah.
And it's are you kidding me? I want to ask you questions. I want to ask you some questions. Just curious.
You should get out of the car. Park your car in the middle of 20.
Go interview him. Yeah. So, when this happened, what were you thinking? I keep expecting to come back by and there'd just be cars exploding.
Yeah.
You know, in the middle of the road.
Well, they did.
Waited too late. Oh, man.
Good morning. I see some extended Piedmont Road family with us this morning, so good to have everybody with us. Before we get started on our class this morning, had something I saw online recently and wanted to share with you guys, just to make sure you're awake and rolling this morning. There's a comedian named Mike Goodwin. I don't know if you guys, I wasn't familiar with him until just a couple weeks ago, but he's on, I've seen him on YouTube and Instagram and other places. The place that I saw him was on YouTube. But he has not only some interesting, funny stories, but he's got a really good delivery. A lot of things that resonate with me, just about him talking about growing up, and he talks about church and different things like that. So there's a lot of similarities that I see. But he was talking about something that his grandmother used to say. It's one of grandmother's sayings. He's got a lot of things that his grandmother said, and his mom said, and other folks in his life. But he said his grandmother said, there's only two things in life that you have to worry about. Just two things. That's it. The two things are you healthy or are you sick? And essentially, if you're healthy, you don't have anything to worry about. But if you're sick, you got two things to worry about. Whether you're going to get better or whether you're going to get worse. And if you're going to get better, there's nothing to worry about. But if you're going to get worse, then there's two things to worry about. Whether you're going to live or whether you're going to die. And if you're going to live, well, there's nothing to worry about, right? But if you're going to die, you got two things to worry about. Two things to worry about if you're going to die is, are you going to heaven or are you going to hell? And if you're going to heaven, nothing you need to worry about. But if you're going to hell, you got two things to worry about. Is that original or extra crispy? Jumps right to the conclusion. But yeah, all starts with two things to worry about. I know we worry a lot in our lives, and always reminds us to stay focused on the things that really matter, the things that we can control, things that we can help with. All right, so our book this morning, you guys know we've been studying Fascinating Stories of Forgotten Lives in the Old Testament by Charles Swindoll. Great book. If you guys want to pick that up, that's what we've been working through. I have the copy up here. You guys are more than welcome to grab a picture of the cover or whatever if it's something you'd like to order. This morning, and I have my name pronouncer assistant, Chuck, is going to correct me as I mess up names. Absalom. This chapter is titled Absalom. My God, yes, so far 1 for 1. The Rebel Prince Charming. All right, you guys will see where we get to the Rebel Prince Charming in a little bit. Grab your Bibles, if you don't mind. Turn to 2 Samuel chapter 12. We have a little background before we get there. We won't jump around too much. Lisa, thank you for doing that. 2 Samuel chapter 12. That's where we'll start reading here in a little bit. All right, so last week we talked about David and Abigail. And the story and the history a little bit behind Abigail and how David ended up marrying her. I know a lot of you guys are familiar with that story. We just looked at a little bit different perspective on it. So my question is on David and Abigail, and it kind of plays into what we're going to talk about today. Was she the only wife? Yeah. I heard a oh no and a no. Let me ask you this, was she even the only woman? No. Wives, concubines, even just the ones that we hear of, there's some stats in here, just even the ones that we have in our scripture, knowing that there may have been some others that we're not told about. It's always seemed odd to me. I know it was a little more prevalent. I know that there's scriptures that refer to it, but it's always odd to me about multiple wives and the concubines and things like that. It's interesting too to think about David, and that we know that David was listed as a man after God's own heart. He was a great warrior. He learned to trust the Lord. He was a poet, had some songs, had a talent for music. Decent integrity compared to some of his peers, when you look at it that way, but still had this going on. And so it's interesting to think about, contrary to me sometimes, his relationship with God, but then the sin that he had. But honestly, not a lot different than us to some degree. So at a point, he had become king of part of Israel. He had multiple wives, and he moved his wives into a palace in Hebron. Again, this is just part of his rise to the king. About 7.5 years later, his enemies had died, and he became the uncontested king of the 12 tribes. And at that point, he moved his palace with his wives to Jerusalem. Right? So that was kind of seen as the capital, if you will. Now, I mentioned it just a second ago, but specifically Deuteronomy 17:17 talks about where God expressly commands for Israel's kings not to build harems. It is flat out right there in about 8 or 10 words. Do not do this. So again, here we see David in this scenario. I don't want you guys to get distracted, but just know that that leads to part of our story today. So Abigail was sharing the palace with a number of David's other wives and concubines. And we know that this was maybe socially acceptable at the time. We know especially from royalty, I wouldn't say it was expected, but everybody realized that it was happening. But the other thing too is, as you read these next few chapters, from, I think I said chapter 11, I actually meant chapter 12, for those of you that are on electronic, 2 Samuel chapter 12. But as you read chapter 12 through maybe chapter 15 or 16, it becomes apparent that this scenario and others like it held David back from becoming who God wanted him to be. And we have a little bit of that we're going to be talking about today. So Absalom, as we talked about the rebel Prince Charming, Absalom was the son of a wife. Here's my second one, Chuck. Maacah? Maacah? Okay. Oh, you started Hebrew on me now.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Now, what's interesting about this particular wife, this was Absalom's mom. David was the father. Even without David, there was some royalty that was in this family. Michal was the daughter of the king of Talmai, and he ruled an important city near the Sea of Galilee. I want you guys to remember that Talmai, T-A-L-M-A-I, if I'm not pronouncing it right. I want you to remember that for later, because there's part of the story. There's a few of these things, in fact. There's part of the stories that are going to come back to other elements of this. Okay, so imagine if your birth father had multiple wives and concubines, and everybody was in one house. You guys know just a family of 3 or 4 or 5 sometimes what the challenges arise. I can't imagine with a scenario like this what it may have been like, just in general. But think about it from the kid's perspective. Let's look at it from Absalom's perspective. Imagine what his childhood was like. I think about today, even just, parents go into an event or something with multiple wives and multiple children. I don't know how people would keep up. So recall too that David had his loyal friends, right? These are friends that had been warriors with him in the past. They were loyal to him. He was loyal, ended up being loyal to them as it went on. The Bible, in fact, referred to them as the 30. So there's a couple of things that I'm about to weave in here, and I promise I don't want it to get complicated, but all of it's relevant to some degree, so hang in there with me. Eliam had his daughter, had a beautiful daughter. Her name was Bathsheba. We know more about that story. Specifically, it's mentioned in 2 Samuel chapter 11. If you guys want to go back there at some point, not now. Don't want your pages turning. So Eliam had given his daughter Bathsheba in marriage to Uriah, Uriah being one of the 30. David gave Uriah an estate just behind the palace. You know where that ended up going. But I don't think I had realized that David had given him that estate behind the palace there. Again, one of his peers, one of his buddies. The other thing is, this was, Eliam's daughter was Bathsheba. Eliam's father was also a chief advisor to David. Okay, so this is a person that his daughter was involved in David's group, if you will, social group, and then his father was also involved. Think about this, it was explained as David's Secretary of State, right? So picture somebody that's part of his cabinet, if you will, being Secretary of State. Ahithophel is his name. Okay, so this is the second thing that I want you to remember. Just set that one aside. Ahithophel. Remember that name. Oh, sure. If I'm pronouncing it right, remember that name. All right, so David was busy. We already talked about with the family and everything. David was busy, right? Conquering, building, decisions about taxes, decisions about war, obviously some administrative things, travel, appearances. Think about all the things that a king of that time would have to be involved in, let alone the family and all the things that were going on at home there. So many wives, too many children, and again, hard to picture that he could actually have an impact, an intentional impact on any of them. And I say intentional because that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about. He had an impact on those, but an intentional impact, meaning that earthly father and that impact, that positive impact that can come from there. Yes, he had an impact, but it may not have been an intentional impact. All right, so I mentioned about the different wives and things like that. here's what's known, and I say known, what we're told about in the Bible. There's 8 named wives. From those, there's 9 boys and 1 girl that we know about. There was 9 boys that were from other wives. And there was 1 boy that's mentioned that was born to a concubine. Okay, so you see the wives, the concubines, their children, mostly the boys that are mentioned, but 1 girl that will come into our story today as well. Okay, so prior to our reading, I mentioned about 2 Samuel chapter 11. Talks about the sin of adultery between David and Uriah and Bathsheba. So that obviously was, today's time we would call that a scandal. Obviously a lot more than that. But God broke open that scandal. That comes into play a little bit later. Let's look at 2 Samuel chapter 12, and it's always be 2 Samuel. I'll just do chapter and verse from here on out, if you guys don't mind. As I read this, I want you guys to remember this in a little bit. Sorry, that's like 3 things I've already told you to remember. 2 Samuel chapter 12. You don't have to remember, just remember, oh, wait a minute, we talked about that. All right. Chapter 12, verse 11 and 12. Thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up adversity against you from your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of the sun. For you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel, before the sun. Okay? So a lot of you are already familiar with that, but that's going to come into play. This is what God is telling David. So this will come into play a little bit later. All right, so let's circle back to Absalom's childhood. What do you guys think it was like growing up in this house, if you will? What might some of the challenges have been?
Jealousy.
Jealousy, okay. Let me ask you guys this. If you haven't seen them, there are TV shows about these scenarios that are on right now. And you don't have to watch very far to realize all the different things that are going on. And so, if there's enough for today's culture to be entertained with this, you can imagine during these times the challenges that may have occurred. Adultery, sorry, I skipped a note there. So growing up, looking at Absalom's childhood, Absalom became, what we'll learn is that he became resentful to his father. He realized his father was absentee. We talked about all the busy things that David would be doing, but he was an absentee father. But Absalom also realized, because he was older of the group, that once he started realizing about the adultery, the murder, his respect for his father continued to drop. And at some point, Absalom snapped. Okay? Now, in houses like this, where in this case, where the father is absent, siblings, as you guys know, can be very dependent upon one another. The relationship can be very strong where the siblings are depending on one another, whether it's brother and sister, 2 brothers, sisters, whatever the scenario is. Where there are situations where a parent is not there, a lot of times the siblings are dependent upon one another. And Absalom was close to his sister Tamar. I mentioned about all the wives and the concubines, the male children. The one female child, Tamar, is the only female that's mentioned, or that we have note of, that I recall. Absalom was very close to his sister Tamar. David was their father. They had the same mother, but there were other children around them in the house that had a different mother. In fact, he was close enough to Tamar that he actually ended up naming his daughter Tamar. So he obviously had a lot of respect for her. All right, 2 Samuel 13, verses 1 and 2. Where we get into the story a little bit more. After this, Absalom, the son of David, had a lovely sister whose name was Tamar, and Amnon, the son of David, loved her. Amnon, the son of David, loved her. Amnon was so distressed over his sister Tamar that he became sick, for she was a virgin, and it was improper for Amnon to do anything to her. So again, Amnon and Absalom and Tamar were all children of David, different mothers. The desires and actions that we're going to be talking about here with Amnon are declared an abomination. We can read that. We know that, but I mean, it's in Leviticus. It's also mentioned in Deuteronomy. Let's jump down to verse 6 and 7. Then Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill, and when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, "Please let Tamar my sister come and make a couple of cakes for me in my sight, that I may eat from her hand." And David sent home to Tamar, saying, "Now go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him." See, Amnon was tricking her. We know this story. Was tricking her to get her alone by herself. Jump down to verse 10. We'll go through 13 here. Then Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food into the bedroom, that I may eat from your hand." And Tamar took the cakes which she had made and brought them to Amnon, her brother, in the bedroom. Now when she had brought them to him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, "Come, lie with me, my sister." But she answered him, "No, my brother, do not force me, for no such thing should be done in Israel. Do not do this disgraceful thing. And where would I take my shame? And as for you, you would become like one of the fools in Israel. Now therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you." That last part. Does that strike anybody weird?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
I think so. I think that I'm trying to figure out from Tamar's perspective, and again, we don't want to go too far down a path, but I'm trying to think, was this just her trying to get away from the situation quickly? It's probably the scenario. But I'm really wondering, like, if Amnon had wrested that situation and had gone and asked David if he could marry Tamar, what would have happened? But I believe that was her absolutely just trying to get her way out of the situation quickly, which is respectful from that perspective. All right, let's move down to verse 14. However, he would not heed her voice, and being stronger than she, he forced her and lay with her. Now, let's look at what happened after that. And it's interesting to think about the men in her life and what their reaction was. Look at verse 20 through 22. Absalom, her brother, said to her, "Has Amnon your brother been with you? But now hold your peace, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this thing to heart." So Tamar remained desolate in her brother Absalom's house. But when King David heard of all these things, he was very angry. That's it. He was very angry. Right? And that obviously becomes part of the problem. We have talked in this class multiple occasions about how when things go on and they're not handled, how that festers and leads to other challenges. And this is certainly one of those scenarios. So Absalom stewed on this for another couple of years. You guys remember us talking about Cain and how he let that unresolved sin and anger and where that went. Remember we had said that Absalom had snapped? Well, this is where he began plotting revenge on his brother, Amnon. Let's look down at verse 28 and 29. Absalom had commanded his servants, saying, "Watch now, when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, strike Amnon, then kill him. Do not be afraid. Have I not commanded you? Be courageous and valiant." So the servants of Absalom did to Amnon, so Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and each one got on his mule and fled. So let's take a real quick recap of where we are to this point. We have Prince Absalom. Remember, he's the son of a king. So Prince Absalom, raised in this dysfunctional house. His half-brother raped his sister. His father did nothing about it. And what we see is that this leads to another murder, and then Absalom goes into hiding. Now this is one of the places where I wanted you guys to remember. Let's read where he goes into hiding, and let's put this back together from something we read a little earlier. Look at verse 37 through 39. Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, king of Geshur, and David mourned for his son every day. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there for 3 years. King David longed to go to Absalom, for he had been comforted concerning Amnon, because he was dead. Who was in Talmai? Grandfather. His grandfather on his mom's side. Remember, he was a king in an area there near the Sea of Galilee. He actually ended up being there for a few years. So the thought is it's probably good to think about what he wasn't getting from his own earthly father. He was seeing better results, more family, if you will, from the other side of the family, and his grandfather specifically, his mom's father. So at this point, David seems to have rested and said, well, all's well. I don't have to do a whole lot. He didn't have to carry out any justice against Amnon, one son. Absalom had put himself into a self-imposed exile, so that was kind of set aside. But David finally reached out. It's interesting when he finally reaches out to Absalom to try to reconnect, what the reaction is there. If you look at 14 and verse 23, 2 Samuel chapter 14 and verse 23. Joab arose, Joab based on the king asking him to. Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said, let him return to his own house, but do not let him see my face. So Absalom returned to his own house, but did not see the king's face. Absalom had been away for about 3 years. The king sent somebody for him and came back. And when he came back, he said, I don't want to see him face to face. Okay? It continues to be even more interesting here. What's interesting, too, is to think about how this compares to the prodigal son. Think about when that son left and what his father's reaction was when he came back. Now compare that to what you see here between David and Absalom. All right, so what we've noted before is in this class is that there's a lot of blame to go around to different people. All right, so was David holding on to some resentment?
Right.
Yeah. He became unforgiving, more unforgiving actually. What about Absalom? Was Absalom holding on to some resentment?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, both of them, right? So nobody's in the clear here. In fact, Absalom became more bitter and more vengeful. So this is where it's a little interesting. I don't know if it's his time with his the hair of his head at 200 shekels according to the king's standard. According to the king's standard. So he would cut his hair once a year. He would cut his hair once a year because it was so heavy. And in this scenario, 200 shekels of the king's measurement was about 3 pounds. Now the point here is to talk about that he was without blemish, obviously a good-looking man, flowing hair, so much so that his hair was even heavy where he had to cut it once a year. So they're just trying to paint a picture of what he may look like. Again, a little bit of a pivot in the writing from what we've seen before. He's becoming something different on the outside than he is on the inside. So let's jump down to chapter 15, first 6 verses there. Chapter 15, let's start in verse 1. After this, it happened that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. So now Absalom would rise early and stand beside the way to the gate. So it was, whenever anyone had a lawsuit that came to him for a decision, that Absalom would call to him and say, "What city are you from?" And he would say, "Such and such, and your servant is from such and such tribe of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your case is good and right, but there is no deputy of the king to hear you." Moreover, Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were made judge in the land, and everyone who had any suit or cause would come to me, that I would give him justice." And so it was that whenever anyone came near to bow down to him, that he would put out his hand, take his hand, and kiss him. And in the manner Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. This is where the author of the book that I'm reading, Charles Swindoll, gets the rebel Prince Charming coming from. Obviously, he's a good-looking man, and now this is where the rebel side starts to come out. The prophet Nathan had predicted earlier that the sword would never depart from the house of David. And we're going to see a little bit more of that. The king had finally agreed to see Absalom. Absalom bowed and David kissed him, but in this case it was more like a handshake. It wasn't the "I haven't seen you in forever." There was no peace between these two. Absalom at that point had set out to overthrow David. That became part of his mission. Now my question to you guys is, do you think that Absalom's bitterness, again, it's always easy for us to look back at history, much like we do with anything, to look back at history and question it. Not that it happened or not, but how could it have been different? Do you think Absalom's bitterness would have relaxed if David had been more transparent, if he had been unguarded, maybe willing to bear some of the anger and the extra criticism that Absalom had? You guys think so? Could have been a little different. Do children expect parents to be perfect?
Should they or do they?
Probably.
Do they expect their parents to be perfect? Do parents perceive that their kids think that they should be perfect? As parents, we feel like our kids should only see the good things and maybe not necessarily the bad things. I think that what Charles Swindoll was pointing out, which I think is some great points here, kids want to know about their parents, warts and all. You know, don't live with your kids at a distance such that they don't get to see you. And that not only just that physical thing, but they don't get to see all those elements of you. And they can't get close to you from that perspective. Because part of getting close to you is just like us getting close to our kids or getting close to others in our lives, is that when you're close to someone, you're going to see the good and the bad. And we have to keep that in mind. Again, I don't want this to hone in on just parents and children, because there's a lot of perspectives that we have with that. But anytime we're going to get close together, we're going to see each other a little more than just the superficial, fun, good stuff that occurs. So Absalom wanted some resolution from his dad. Let's look at, let's go back, chapter 14, verse 32. Hopefully I've got my scripture right here. Absalom had answered Joab. This is part of the deceit, if you will. Absalom had answered Joab, "Look, I sent you saying, 'Come here, so that I may send you to the king to say, why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me to still be there. Now therefore, let me see the king's face. But if there is an iniquity in me, let him excuse me.'" So essentially, the king brought Absalom back, and Absalom had not yet seen his father David. And he's telling his servant, "Why did you bring me back here? If there's something I've done wrong, then you can kill me here, but there's no reason for me to be back here." It shows a little bit about the resentment and things that are going on. All right, so no peace for Absalom. Let's go back to 15. We'll look at chapter 15 and verse 4. Moreover, Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were made judge in the land of everyone." No, in fact, you know what, let's skip that just for the sake of time. All right, so David's ready to act. David is ready to try to interact with his son. Let's look at chapter 15, verse 12. Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gileonite, David's counselor from the city of Gilead, while he offered sacrifices, and the conspiracy grew strong for the people, with Absalom continually increasing in number. So this is where the rebellion of Absalom starts to come in. You guys remember that name that I just mentioned there in verse 12? Yeah? You guys remember who that was? That was someone that was very close to David. And Absalom knew if he could get Ahithophel on his side, that would be a win. Now here was another thing of how Ahithophel may have already had some issues with David. This was Bathsheba's grandfather. So there was, you know, essentially there may have been more to it from that perspective. All right, so remember when Saul was after David, and that had settled. Now who's after him? One of his sons is after him. Ahithophel provided some advice to Absalom. Let's see if this sounds familiar. Let's go to chapter 16 and verse 21. Chapter 16 and verse 21. And so it was when Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came to Absalom, that Hushai said to Absalom, "Long live the king, long live the king." So Absalom said to Hushai, Is this your loyalty to your friend? Why did you not go with your friend?" And Hushai said to Absalom, "No, but whom the Lord and the people and all the men of Israel chose, his I will be, and with him I will remain. Furthermore, whom shall I serve? Should I not serve in the presence of his son? As I have served in your father's presence, so I will also be in your presence." Then Absalom said to Ahithophel, "Go, advise as to what we should do." And Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Go into your father's concubines, in whom he has left to keep the house, and all of Israel will hear that you are abhorred by your father. Then the hands of all who are with you will be strong." So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the top of the house, and Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Now the advice of Ahithophel, which he had given in those days, was that if one had inquired at the oracle of God, so all the advice of Ahithophel, both David and with Absalom. Right? So obviously I don't want to get too graphic here, but if you think about what God told David was going to happen, look, after Bathsheba, he said, there's more that's going to come out of this, and someone that's close to you will end up being an adversary to you. And that's exactly what's happening here. All right, does the story with Absalom end well for those that have read ahead? No. Unfortunately, it does not. Again, David was ready to fight back. Chapter 18, verse 5. Now the king had commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, saying, "Deal gently with my sake for the young man Absalom." And all the people heard when the king gave all the captains orders concerning Absalom. He's essentially realizing that there's some sort of a battle that's going to come up, and the king is saying, essentially, this is one of my sons, deal gently with him. So tragedy is upon Absalom. Let's go down to verses 9 through 15. A little bit of a read, but you guys hang in there with me on this. Chapter 18, verse 9. Absalom met the servants of David. Absalom rode on a mule. The mule went under a thick bough of a great terebinth tree, and his head caught in the terebinth tree. So he was left hanging between heaven and earth. and the mule which was under him went on. Now a certain man saw it and told Joab and said, I just saw Absalom hanging in a terebinth tree. So Joab said to the man who told you, you just saw him? And why did you not strike him to the ground? I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a belt. But the man said to Joab, though I were to have received 1,000 shekels of silver in my hand, I would not raise my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing, the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, beware lest anyone touch the young man of Absalom. Otherwise I would have dealt falsely against my own life, for there is nothing hidden from the king, and you yourself would have set yourself against me. Then Joab said, I can't linger with you anymore. And he took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through Absalom's heart, while he was still alive in the midst of the terebinth tree. And the young man who bore Joab's armor surrounded Absalom and struck and killed him. So essentially, Absalom's on his mule. He passes underneath a branch. His head gets caught in the branch. It pulls him off his mule. He's hanging there. These men have a little bit of a debate, and then they essentially put him out of his misery and kill him. That becomes the end of Absalom. David's reaction to this, verse 33. The king was deeply moved, went up to the chamber over the gate, and wept. And as he went, he said this, O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if I only had died in your place. O Absalom, my son, my son. I'm going to presume that David probably had a lot of memories of Absalom flashing through his mind at that time. And I kind of wondered if he had regretted anything to the point of that he wishes he would have done things differently. Possibly about making things right before the death of Absalom. So you guys know we like to take these scriptures, make some applications. And here in the last couple of minutes, let's look at some applications. An unhappy home produces unbalanced children. And again, you guys know we're talking about parents and children here, but this could be friends, relatives, nieces, nephews, others that we are just close to. Unhappy home produces unbalanced children. All that David had, but he couldn't lead his own family. Can you guys imagine what it would take a counselor in today's time to sort through all this? Can't imagine. Think of all that you're doing now. Are you contributing to a happy home? Is it well balanced, godly, safe? We invest in ourselves. We think about investing in our wealth. We invest in our jobs, obviously in our careers. But what about our homes? That's where God wants us to spend some of our time, or much of our time. Another lesson here is a lack of parental discipline breeds insecurity and resentment in children. So we have learned, again, a little bit about how discipline, if it's not correctly applied, or even applied at all, how it can have effects. And in this case, insecurity and resentment. Again, think about Absalom, how he felt about his father. So kids today got a lot of things that are going their way. But they long for a home where right behavior is rewarded and wrong behavior is acknowledged and firmly dealt with. Rule setting and enforcement is not a bad thing, but lack of that can lead to insecurity. We want to love, yes. We want to express affection, yes. But do we want to have boundaries that our children need to obey? Absolutely. And the third point here, failure to repair a broken relationship can inflict wounds that never heal. And do we know this? I think about, we've had some church members that have had physical wounds that just, like an open wound that just is struggling to heal. And I know from a physical perspective, I can't imagine what that's like. But think about an emotional wound and the challenges that has. Emotional wounds that are never given the attention that they need. The thing that I would encourage you guys, which you know you've heard before, this is nothing new. It's never too late to repair broken relationships. And there can be others that need to approach you with that. There may be some that you need to approach with that. I say it's never too late. When's it actually too late? Yeah, when you're dead or they're dead. All right. So I don't want to end on that note, but in reality, that's something that we all need to kind of keep in mind and to seek to correct and adjust wherever we can before death is upon us. Thanks you guys again for your time this morning. Look forward to seeing you next Sunday.